Hey everyone, Deborah here. I am talking to you today about kidding in cold weather. This is part of my series this week, helping you all get ready for kidding season. And if you want to learn more, I also have a free course that I just created this year. And there's a link to that in the description for this episode. So, kidding in cold weather is really important because kids are born soaking wet, obviously. And, imagine going outside soaking wet when it's 20 degrees or 0 degrees. You would not be doing very well for very long. And Go Kids are a lot smaller than you and me. So it's really important that those kids get dry and warm as soon as possible. So I'm going to start at the beginning here with what you need to do before your goat even goes into labor. And the first thing is that you want to be sure that you have plenty of towels available, as well as if it's going to be really cold, if it's going to be below freezing, I like to have a heating pad and a blow dryer available. In the beginning, we would go pretty cold. I think we would go into single digits before we pulled out the blow dryer, but it did not take a long time for me to realize that when kids are born and it's really, really cold out, that they lose their sucking instinct very quickly because they get hypothermia. And so it's very important to get them warm as quickly as possible. You have nothing to gain by not using a blow dryer. This is not about coddling your goats and things like that. Goats are desert animals. In nature, they are not born when it's, 20 degrees, certainly not 0 degrees out. So it's, our responsibility if we get them pregnant or if, there's a problem with the fence and a buck gets in at the wrong time and they get pregnant, it's our responsibility to take care of them when they are giving birth in really unnatural conditions. And so if it's below, really at this point, I'm like, if it's below freezing, let's just get the blow dryer out, get this kid dried off as quickly as possible. It is amazing. If kids are born when it's warmer than 60 degrees, they will be on their feet and nursing, looking for the udder within 10 minutes, 15, really fast compared to, and then the colder it gets, the longer it takes, to the point that if you've got a kid that's born when it is, like 0 degrees outside, if you don't have it dry and warm within half an hour, you're probably looking at some really serious remediation at that point, trying to get them warmed up. So the heating pad is as much for me as it is for the kids, honestly. Um, when it's, in the teens or lower, I just kind of feel like that's not a good temperature for anybody to be out there. And so I will usually have the heating pad in my lap. When the kids are born, I put the kids on a towel that's on the heating pad so the towel can absorb the mucus and birth goo, and I'm blow drying the top. Now, when it is super, super cold like that, you have to hold the blow dryer like this close to the kid's hair. And you notice like you're roughing up their hair while you're blow drying. And as you move that blow dryer away, you will find that once you're about that far away, it's not hot anymore. It's cold air that's blasting down on there. So you've got your hand there. It is not going to burn that kid. If it was 80 degrees out and you had a blow dryer that close, that is a different story. But when it's 10 degrees out or below 0, then you need to have that blow dryer right there as close as possible. And like I said, you're running your hand back and forth on the hair, so you'll know if it's too hot, and just move it back a tiny bit until it feels nice and warm. The other thing is that dry at 80 degrees is very different than dry when you get into single digits and below 0. We learned that very quickly. Like, you think that you've got them dry, like what would be okay if it was 80 degrees, and if it's really cold, you might find that there's little ice crystals on the hair. in a minute or two after you remove the blow dryer. So this always reminds me of how, when you go to the salon and they cut your hair and then they blow dry it, they wind up, it feels like they're really overdoing it. Like they are just drying and drying, and you're like, just done already, okay? Like it takes them 10 minutes to blow dry your hair, and if I'm home, it's like 2 minutes, I'm good. So what you're going for when it's single digits or colder, and I'm talking Fahrenheit here, I'm not talking Celsius. Um, when you're looking at temperatures that cold, you need to make sure that you have it what I call salon dry, okay? So like it is so far, like you think like, oh, it was dry 10 minutes ago, keep drying. The other thing that you need to be aware of, once you get below 0, you are looking at serious possibilities of frostbite here. And I am sad to say we have learned about every potential um, type of frostbite the hard way. And so hopefully you can learn from our mistake. The very first time we had a below 0 kidding was a set of triplets. And that was where we also learned that like dry wasn't what we thought was dry. Um, but I thought the kids were dry, and my 2 daughters were with me, and one of them said, "Mom, I think this kid's ear's frozen." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And I felt it, and it was hard. Like, you know how a kid's ear is like soft, like it's skin, like when they're born, it's just soft, it's floppy, it's very pliable. When you felt that kid's ear, it was hard, and it was very cold. And I'm like, I just blow dried you like 5 minutes ago. And so it's like put it back in my lap, and I'm blow drying again. And in my head, I'm trying to think back to high school or college first aid class, like, oh my gosh, is it supposed to be you're supposed to heat up with frostbite? You're supposed to heat it up fast or slow. I couldn't remember, but I thought I have no way of like just researching this right now. I think sooner the better. And so I was just blow drying that kid's ear. I wasn't rubbing it because I knew that could be bad. Like the ice crystals in there could cause damage. And so I was just blow drying it really strongly. And the kid did wind up losing the tip of his ear. Not as bad as I have seen. I felt like a real dummy one time. We were at a goat show, and there was an Oberhausley goat there, which I saw her and I thought, "Oh my gosh, she has the cutest little Mickey Mouse ears." This was an Oberhausley with ears like this long, and I said, "Oh, her ears are so cute. I've never seen ears like that before." And the woman looked at me like I was an idiot and goes, "They're frostbitten." And I was like, oh, like that was before I even knew that they could lose their ears to frostbite. So you want to make sure that you get them really dry and like keep checking them, like keep feeling them to make sure that they are really dry. And that very first time, I know we just did not do a good job of it because the girls kept going out and checking on them, and they kept saying, um, oh my goodness, they feel really cold again. And so I think, and that never happened again. So I think in the future we were just much, much better about really understanding what we needed to do in terms of getting them dry. Um, Another thing is that you can lose a tail to frostbite. Again, learn this one the hard way. I think this was only like our second or third below 0 kidding. And I was so focused on the ears. We had an intern here at the time, and I'm like, we got to get the ears dry. The ears have to be really dry. And so we just kept blow drying the ears over and over and over again, and did not realize that I had not blow dried her tail. And it was just one of the kids. Thank goodness it wasn't more than one. Um, and it was like, probably it was like a week or 10 days later. Um, I noticed that this kid's tail was like L-shaped, like instead of sticking up straight, it was like this. And I was like, what is wrong with that kid's tail? Did it get broken? And I picked it up, and when I looked at it carefully, I realized it was just hanging by the tiniest little piece of skin. Like, it and that was when and we started talking about it, and then we're like, "Oh my gosh, she was one of the kids that was born at 3 AM when it was, like 7 or 8 degrees, or I think that was actually the one that was the 15 below 0 kidding that we had. Because the tail has, like, a lot of hair on it, and it's very, um so that really, really holds a lot of moisture, and unfortunately and it was just the tiniest little piece of skin, and so it was, like, super easy, like, I cut it, and there was, like, one little dot of blood because most of it had just frozen and atrophied and fallen off. Um, and then, Tiffany said, "I hope she managed well enough without a tail." You know what she did? It was kinda like the Oberhasli I saw at the show that had the little Mickey Mouse ears. Her she her little tail was so short, and when I sold her, I told the person, like, "Okay, she's probably gonna look like she has a fishtail forever because half of her tail fell off, and so she's never gonna have a big, full, bushy tail. It's gonna look like, because the scar tissue at the end, like, it's probably never gonna grow hair correctly." But yeah, she was okay, but it was it was kinda sad. And the little guy that lost one of his ears, somebody actually bought him for that reason. When they came to look at bucks, because he was out of one of my best milkers, she's like because he had 2 brothers, he was one of triplet bucks, and, she said she saw him, she's like, "Oh, he's so cute, I want the one that's missing half of an ear." So, um, losing part of an ear definitely does not affect a buck's ability to breed, so, that was a good thing too. Now, the third possibility, unfortunately, does not have a good ending. And luckily, by the time this happened to us, I had already worked with somebody from Canada who had had this situation. There was a woman in Canada a bunch of years ago who had purchased quite a number of bred goats. And she was from middle Canada, like not even by the border. She was from way up there. And these goats were due to kid in the middle of winter, and so she had a lot of babies around, when the temperature was, like, 30 to 40 degrees below 0, and, so she wound up, creating a lot of little kid huts, out of barrels that were cut in half and upside down and stuff, and she put the light in them. You've probably seen these plans online before where somebody puts a heat lamp in there. Well, what happened was one night when the temperature dropped to like 40 below 0 is that they lost electricity. And she had some kids that got frostbite on one or more legs. And if kids are sleeping with their legs tucked underneath them, all 4 legs tucked underneath them, they will be fine. Um, but if they are kind of just lean to the side a little bit and the legs are out, then if they're exposed and it's 30 or 40 degrees below 0, that's not good. Um, and she wound up and what happens, like, with the ears and the tail, if they get frostbite, they fall off. Same thing happens with the legs, is that they fall off. And it was not obvious to us immediately the time this happened to us. We had a time when it got to -25, and this kid was 1 day old, and we did have a heat lamp in there. But one thing, remember how I said, like, with the blow dryer, you've got to have it like this close to them when it's that cold. Otherwise, the air is not warm. Well, it's the same thing if you're using a heat lamp. Like if the heat, your heat lamp's like 3 feet away, it's really not helping a whole lot, when it's that cold out. And we had never had -25-degree temperature here ever before. And, thankfully, it's only happened once. We've had -20 a couple times, and we had one time, that time that it got to -25, that was part of a 36-hour stretch where our high was -15. And I am talking real temperatures here, Fahrenheit, not wind chills. And so this is what the temperatures were, even in the barn. And, So, unfortunately, this one kid, he was about a day old, and he must have been sleeping with his 2 hind legs out to the side rather than tucked underneath him, and we did not realize it right away, but he got frostbite on his 2 hind legs, which wound up, after about 2 weeks, about this much of his hind legs fell off. And so, like the person in Canada, we wound up, putting him down because that would be a very challenging life for a goat to not have full legs. And we felt bad that we didn't realize it sooner because we noticed he was limping. He was like holding up, but it was go back and forth and we couldn't quite figure out what it was. And then when the legs fell off, it clicked, especially because we realized that we had had those extremely cold temperatures. So it's really important. And that wasn't even when the day that he was born. It was when he was like a day old that that happened. So you need to make sure that, when if kids are born in these temperatures, that you get them dried off and warm as soon as possible so that you don't wind up with frostbite. And as far as the humans go, you have to make sure you dress really, really, really warmly. I was a wimpy city girl when we moved out here. And so I thought, oh, long underwear with blue jeans or sweatpants is good. But you really do need to have those Carhartts or Schmidt insulated coveralls, insulated overalls, something like that, that's super, super thick. A friend of mine discovered that she thought like, oh, her husband's ski pants would be fine. And then when they got worn out and she went and bought a pair of Carhartts, that like, no, the Carhartts are way warmer. So I was really amazed at the difference. The first time I bought a pair because they were on sale at the end of the season, and it was still cold, of course, because that's how those sales go. And the first time I walked outside, I was just like, oh my goodness, the only thing that feels cold is my face. However, if it is below zero and you're out there for 2 or 3 hours, you're still going to feel it on the rest of your body. So you want to make sure that you keep yourself warm. And I think that's about it. I had some notes. Real quick. Oh, the idea of putting coats on your kids, I also wanted to address that. Um, People send me, of course, because I'm the goat lady. So people send me all the funny little goat videos of the goats in pajamas and stuff like that, which really kind of irritate me because goats don't need pajamas. And goats do not need coats either. In fact, that's actually really dangerous, even with collars, because goats climb, they jump, they put their feet on things. So the collars I use are breakaway collars. They have a 60-pound break weight. And so if a goat's collar gets stuck on something, it'll break before it chokes them. The thing that's really important about those coats and pajamas and stuff is that they could get stuck on something and you could have an animal get injured or possibly even killed. So one time I think it was about 6 or 7 years ago, I was laid up in bed with a busted knee that was the size of a football. And my husband was really worried about a couple of newborn kids. He blow dried them and stuff. That it's like every time he would go out there, they seemed kind of lethargic. He didn't see them nursing. Their mouths were cold. He'd blow dry them. He'd put them on the heating pad. And then finally I said, well, go ahead and, we can make these cute little kid coats out of an old sweatshirt sleeve. So I did. And he took them out there, put them on. And the next day, next morning, he went out there and he found that somehow the mama had her leg had gone through the collar, which used to be the wristband, because this becomes the collar on the kid's coat. It had somehow gone through the collar and then come out the kid's leg. And she was dragging around this dead kid, probably because she had wound up laying on it at some point and smushing it because her leg got stuck in that coat. And so that is seriously the last time that we ever used a kid coat. And, not saying I wouldn't use it again, but I definitely it's kinda like tube feeding. I will climb mountains and swim the widest seas, and I will do everything I can to avoid having to tube feed a kid, and so I only wind up tube feeding about once every 5 years, and that's how I feel about, you know, dressing baby goats now, is that I'm gonna do everything I possibly can to get that kid to maintain its body temperature before I resort to putting any kind of clothing on it because, I just don't wanna take that kind of a risk. My husband was so upset when he found the kid, that dead kid. So, because of course, it's like it was out of one of our really great milkers, like, which just makes it even sadder. Um, I think that's about it. I like that idea, Tiffany. Have a video series about stuff you shouldn't do for goats and call it bad ideas. I like that. Um, oh, and then the other thing that's really super important, and I'm actually going to talk about this in another video coming up, but you got to get those kids started with nursing. Like I said, if they get hypothermia, the first thing that is going to go is their sucking instinct. One of the reasons you do not find me on goat groups in Facebook is because whenever somebody talks about a kid that won't nurse, 90% of people are screaming, give it a Posey shot. Nobody is saying, what's the temperature where you are? Um, because if it's really cold, like stick your finger in the kid's mouth. If that kid's mouth is not warm, and I've had people go, well, what's warm? You know what warm is. This is not a trick question. Especially when you're like in a barn and it's freezing, okay? You stick your finger in the kid's mouth, it should feel warm. If it feels like ice water, that's bad. Like then you have to get it warmed up. I got a call one time from somebody who just like right off the bat, like, hi, I need to know how to tube feed a kid. I am not just going to tell somebody how to tube feed a kid without knowing why. And so I start asking her a few questions. Well, tell me what's happened. And if I had told her to tube feed the kid would have died because that's not what the kid needed. The kid had hypothermia. The kid needed to be warmed up. 99% of the time, you get a kid warmed up and it will start nursing or it'll take a bottle or whatever. You get it warmed up, the sucking instinct comes back, and you are good to go. You got plenty of time to tube feed after that if it still won't take a bottle. But if their body temperature, if they have hypothermia, their stomach is not their priority and they are not going to digest the colostrum. So it's just going to sit in their stomach and ferment and it's not good for them. So you need to make sure that they are warm before. And I mean, this is like very smart, right? Like, oh, they don't need to suck if their stomach can't digest the colostrum because their body has hypothermia. So get the kid warmed up, and then the sucking instinct comes back. You can get them to nurse. And then once you get colostrum into them, that it's like me getting a hot cup of coffee first thing in the morning in the winter. Like, I don't even ask me to get out of bed. My husband's awesome. He brings me a hot cup of coffee every morning, to help me get warmed up before I even get out of bed and get going. And so that's how your newborn baby kids are. They need to get that nice warm colostrum into their systems before they can do all the other things that baby goats do, like bounce around and be adorable and all that kind of good stuff. Hey, Abby. You said, I got here late. What do you use to heat babies and mamas when it's below zero? Do you use heat lamps? We're so scared to use them because we constantly hear people burning their barns down with them. I totally understand. So the mamas don't usually need it. I'm glad you asked that though, because I did have one mom one time that it just scared the living daylights out of me. And it was actually the very first time we ever had a below zero kidding. I think it was like 5 degrees below zero, which was not even the coldest. But this doe started shaking violently. I mean, like you see this doe in front of you and her body was just trembling. And basically I went inside and got one of my old sweatshirts. I cut the arms off of it and I put the sweatshirt on her. and that helped. She stopped trembling at that point. It's the only time I've had to do that. But if I had another mama who started trembling like that when she was in labor, I'd absolutely do it again. Um, and we do use heat lamps only as long as we absolutely have to, which is usually for the first couple days. And the thing is, you've got to have like the highest bulb in there, like a 250 watt, 175 watts, not even going to come close to, not going to do anything for you when it's that cold. And so we make sure I get the heat lamps from Premier One, which are really sturdy. They're much more sturdy than those flimsy $10 thing metal ones that you can see in all of the farm stores and like in the hardware department, of like your home improvement stores. And it has a ring at the top, and then I use a carabiner clip to put through that, and then that hooks into a big eye hook, great big eye hook. So it's really very sturdy. In fact, I'm glad you asked that, because I have a video of a tour of our kidding barn, and I show you exactly how we put how we attach the heat lamps so that there's 99% no risk that it is ever going to come down. At least not when you just got mamas and babies in there, like I would never put a heat lamp with like bucks and rams and testosterone filled male animals, because you never know what they're going to do. But mama and babies are going to leave it alone. You also want to make sure that you have it high enough that it's not going to singe their hair. Like you wouldn't want that to happen either. So it needs to be fairly high. But there is a link in the description for this live stream, and I'll take you to the free kidding course. And one of the first videos you will see is a tour of our kidding barn, and it shows you how we attach the heat lamps safely. Tiffany, they roughhouse too much. Oh yeah, they do. You would think, I would love to say, oh, I'm just so smart, I would never do that. But no, I actually learned that the hard way. I don't know. Well, I was new. Like this was way long time ago, like 17, 18 years ago. I have no idea why I did it now, but I put a ram in a stall with a heat lamp, and he just looked at it. And I had it too low, obviously, but he just looked at it, put his head down, and bam, he smashed it. And thankfully I was there, and the sparks that flew from the busted bulb did not catch the straw on fire. But definitely taught me a lesson there. Like I'm not going to trust, testosterone filled male goats and sheep to not do something crazy like that. So, if a buck or a ram ever has a problem and it's cold outside, they're just going to have to suck it up and deal with it. So I would even be worried, like if they were incapacitated and I left, like if they'd feel better a couple hours later and get up, because they're just too unpredictable. So, so I think I've got the questions answered, and I think if I look at my notes, I covered everything that I planned to cover today. Oh, you know what? Somebody usually always asks, like, why would anybody kidnap? Well, other than the fact that sometimes you don't have a choice, like a buck, breaks in and gets a doe pregnant when you didn't want him to. But the other thing is that kidding in the dead of winter is also a very legitimate way to get parasites under control. Back in the day, 15 years ago, when we had complete dewormer resistance, all of our goes kidded in January and February, because that's when, although there is no larva on the pasture, like it's all completely covered with snow, it's frozen. And so there's not any added stress on the goats in terms of like, they're not picking up any new larva in the pasture. All they have is what's in their body. And so it's way less stressful on them, because none of the dewormers worked for us back then. They had all stopped working. And so we had to, if a goat kidded like in April or May, she would just lose so much weight. She would get so skinny. And, but that's another story. Like I could talk about parasites for a couple hours. And so that is why we got so much experience with goats kidding in January and February. I'm very happy to say that just through proper management, we overcame all of those parasite problems. And now I might have 1 or 2 goats a year that requires a dewormer. That's it. I have a lot of goats out there that have never had a dewormer in their lives. So you can absolutely get control of parasites just through proper management. In fact, that's really the only way you can do it, because as a vet professor said to me about 16, 17 years ago, you will never get control of worms with drugs. They're all going to become immune to it. The worms will all become immune to it, to the dewormers at some point. So, Tiffany says, speaking of testosterone, I'm pretty certain that the La Mancha boy I was telling you about is actually a wether because he doesn't constantly do dumb stuff. Yeah, that's a really good indication too. I loved it. I had a buck, bought this buck in 2005, and he had been bottle fed, and so he was like super affectionate, which is like, ew, no, please, no, I don't want to pet you, you're stinky. And he became sterile when he was 8 years old, which I was super sad about that, because I really, really wanted him to be breeding my does, because he gave me amazing daughters. Some of my best milkers came from him. And it was wonderful for him when he became sterile, because I could love on him all he wanted then. He would come up to me and he was no longer stinky. And so it was like, oh, I can pet you and rub you like you're a dog, which he just thought was the greatest thing. So the last couple years of his life, I think we're pretty happy. Even though he wasn't able to breed the girls anymore, he really liked the attention he got from people those last couple years. So yeah, love those sweet and not smelly boys. Stephanie asked if I have a training on natural parasite treatment. Yes, I do. I have a course on parasites. It's all research based. And it's really about like understanding the life cycle of the worms and then managing it appropriately. And so it's really the cheapest thing in the world. Like you don't have to buy any kind of dewormers, nothing natural, nothing. Like my goats get nothing for worms. It's all about just proper management. Tiffany said, did you castrate him after he became sterile? Nope. No, he totally just it just all shut down. So, and I learned that like it was breeding season and I was putting does in with him and he was breeding them. And it was really depressing because the doe would come back into heat 3 weeks later. And after doing this, like I was really stubborn because I loved him so much as a sire. There were a couple does I did this like August, September, and October before I was just like, okay, like he's bred like 3 or 4 does 2 to 3 times each. None of them have gotten pregnant. Like he has to be sterile at this point. And then over the course of the winter, his testicles shrunk up to about half of the size they used to be. And when spring arrived, I realized he had absolutely no smell at all anymore. So it was really interesting. So, all right, y'all. Well, this has been so much fun. I will be back tomorrow night at 5:00 again with another live stream about kidding season. I have a list here of like 9 or 10 things. And I think tomorrow night, what I am going to talk about is how many kids can a doe feed? For people, especially people who have Nigerians, which is a very popular breed now. A lot of us have multiples. We have had 8 sets of quintuplets now, and more quads than I can count, because like we've had 700 kids. And our average number of kids per doe is more than 3. Like it's around 3.2 average kids per doe. So tomorrow night at 5:00 Central Time, again, I will be talking about how many kids can a doe feed. And if you want to get hop into that free kidding course, the link is in the description. See you guys again tomorrow. Bye.